Welcome, focused learners. Today, we've got a truly fascinating explainer lined up for you. We're going to take a deep dive into a really profound letter titled The Invisible Value. It was written by the author, composer, and pastor Marco Aurélio. And you know, what makes this piece so compelling is how it tackles those invisible structural dynamics, the systemic challenges that society often just pretends not to see. So get comfortable, because we're going to break down these complex societal observations step by step.
Okay, let's dive into this. The author opens with an absolutely massive premise. We live in a society where the zip code and the color of one's skin often dictate a man's future before he even has the chance to write his own story. I mean, that is a stark reality to put right in front of us. He's outlining how geography and race frequently act as predetermined obstacles. It's literally like trying to run a race, but there's this giant, immovable wall placed on your track before the starting gun even sounds. It sets a really serious, contemplative tone for everything that follows.
To really grasp the depth of this work, we're going to follow a clear path today. First, we'll look at the weight of inequality. Then, the blindness of the state. Third, prejudice in relationships, before shifting over to true wealth. And finally, true human value.
So let's start with our first pillar, Section 1, the weight of inequality, or the silent condemnation of social structure.
And this brilliantly illustrates what's going on behind the scenes. In a structurally unequal society, marginalized communities face these invisible but totally insurmountable daily barriers. The author actually describes the cruelest gear in that social machine as guilt inversion. Basically, when a systemic failure happens, like a literal lack of resources, society often reacts by misjudging it as an individual's moral failure or a character flaw. The blame is entirely inverted. It's essentially punishing the individual for the system's own shortcomings.
Because of this crushing weight, the text makes a pretty heartbreaking observation. Simple survival is already a great act of resistance. When structural prejudice suffocates dreams so early on in life, just waking up, fighting through the day, and surviving against those odds, that becomes a monumental achievement.
Moving right along to Section 2, the blindness of the state, focusing on invisibility before the authorities.
Now, if society at large is already viewed as hostile, the author observes that the pain deepens significantly when the very institutions meant to protect us completely fail to do so. The text points out this stark contradiction. While the state's expected role is to offer active support, care, and act as a vital safety net, its actual behavior is often characterized by pure invisibility and total abandonment. So instead of finding a reliable support system, vulnerable citizens are essentially turned into ghosts within their own society.
The practical impacts of the state abandonment are frankly devastating. First off, it causes total psychological helplessness by just removing any semblance of a safety net. Second, and perhaps most terrifyingly, the state's silence implicitly validates the horrific idea that some lives are simply worth less than others. And finally, when the system itself turns away, seeking any form of justice becomes an impossible mission for the people left behind.
Transitioning now into our third pillar, Section 3, prejudice in relationships, focusing on material judgment in affection.
So we're stepping out of the broad public sphere now and into the most intimate parts of human life. Why? Because discrimination doesn't respect boundaries. The text describes a deep wound where love becomes a battlefield, colliding with class differences. Showing affection for someone from a completely different reality or social class can trigger gratuitous mockery and rejection from the outside world. People end up being judged not by their virtues, but by their bank balance or physical traits. It totally contaminates spaces that should be about pure acceptance and warmth.
Now, what's really interesting about this concept is the author's unique redefinition of the phrase poor in spirit. He defines it as one who measures the value of a human being by the size of their wallet or their skin tone, even if they have money themselves. It's a genius linguistic flip. It shifts the burden of shame completely off the victim and squarely onto the corrupted, shallow values of the person doing the judging.
This brings us perfectly to Section 4, true wealth, exploring character and honesty as a form of resistance.
Instead of just waiting around for some idealistic world where prejudice magically evaporates, the author provides a very practical solution, building an ironclad internal resilience. To do that, he says, you have to recognize the tactics of oppression. Oppressive structures actively try to convince you that you're never enough. They explicitly tell you that your characteristics have no value, and they propagate this highly cynical fallacy that honesty doesn't pay the bills. The sole objective of these tactics, to entirely break the morale of the individual listening to them.
So, the crucial point is the antidote the text proposes by contrasting two ideas of wealth. Material wealth is transient, right? It's inherited or purchasable, and it always has a price tag attached. But in total contrast, moral wealth is permanent. It's forged through struggle, built through integrity, and most importantly, it cannot be bought or stolen. The author uses this comparison to prove that true dignity simply doesn't come with a barcode.
Which leads us to our fifth and final section, true human value, and how identity is sculpted in overcoming.
This is where the letter delivers its concluding, empowering message about where human merit actually originates. The author makes a really strong appeal. Society may try to discard you, but you must never discard yourself. No matter how many doors are slammed in your face due to systemic issues, the absolute biggest mistake you can make is internalizing that unjust rejection and forgetting your own intrinsic worth. The text wraps up this thought by stating identity is sculpted with every overcoming, far removed from the superficial judgment of those who can only see the shell. Think about that. Human value and identity aren't just handed to you on a silver platter. They're built through your struggles, your humanity, and your ability to overcome, completely bypassing the superficial, surface-level judgments of a society that only looks at the exterior.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a final, provocative question to think about. What truly defines human value in such an unequal world? It's an invitation for all of us to recalibrate our moral compasses based on what we just explored. The definitive answer, according to the author, isn't what we carry in our pockets. It's the unshakable dignity we refuse to let society take away from us. Thank you so much for joining me for this deep dive. Stay curious, keep learning, and I'll see you in the next explainer.